Today's episode has been brought to you by OfferingTree. If you are a yoga teacher who would rather spend more time teaching and sharing yoga and less time emailing back and forth with Zoom links and payment options, you need to check out OfferingTree. I've been using this software, OfferingTree, in my own yoga business, and I am so impressed by their customer service and how they are adding features and updates based on the feedback that they are getting from yoga teachers just like you. So if you want to spend more time on the mat and less time in front of your computer, go to offeringtree.com/Shannon to get a special discount. Today's episode is also brought to you by Pelvic Health Professionals. This is an online membership for yoga teachers, PTs, movement educators, healthcare professionals, and anyone wanting to learn more about pelvic health. Every single month, we hire guest experts to teach us the most up-to-date information, and you get to attend the calls live and get your questions answered in real time. Our December guest expert was actually on the podcast last week, Niev Daly, so you can have a listen to that episode if you go back to episode 299, and then join us if you have more questions about menopause and yoga. Visit pelvichealthprofessionals.com for more information and to sign up. Hello and welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher Podcast. I'm your host, Shannon Crow. My pronouns are she, her, and this podcast is being recorded on Anishinaabe, Odawa, and Mississauga land, also called the Bruce Peninsula in Ontario, Canada. If you are new here, you might not know that I'm also a mom of three, a yoga teacher, and the founder of Pelvic Health Professionals. If you've been here before as a returning listener, oh my gosh, thank you for coming back. You know how things go here. This podcast was created for you, the yoga teacher, so that each week you can easily, while you're doing other things, cleaning the house or walking the dog or gardening or all the busy things that you do, you can also at the same time listen to the podcast and get information and inspiration that is going to support you as you're growing and building your yoga business. Because I get it, running your own business can be a really big deal. It can be a lot to put yourself out there. Today's podcast episode is all about, 300 weeks ago, I decided, well, it was even before that, I decided, you know what, I really want to do this podcast for yoga teachers where they can really connect to information, where we can get questions answered together, where we can build and grow community and support each other. And it was scary. So I get it. When you are feeling scared about launching anything in your yoga business, maybe it's a new series, a new program, maybe it's teaching your first class somewhere, I get it. And two things have helped me get to this point of 300 episodes. That is, feeling the fear and doing it anyway, and also letting my message be louder than my doubts and my fears. And I'll get into that a little bit more because there were two questions that were sent into us over the past couple of weeks, and I want to answer those questions here on the podcast. And I want to say thank you to Aruna and Renee who sent these questions in. If you still want to send questions, you're welcome to over on our website, theconnectedyogateacher.com. There's a button there. You can leave me a voice message, or you can scroll down to the bottom and figure out how to send me an email or leave a comment on the show notes page for today's episode. Today's show notes are over at theconnectedyogateacher.com/300. Alrighty, let's get into the first question that was sent in. I'm so grateful for this. Thank you, and shout out to Aruna. Here is what Aruna sent to us.
Hi, Shannon. It's Aruna from Ambassador Yoga Trainer Fast Track, and I have two questions for you today. One is about the first thing that you outsourced that helped you make your business run smoother and helped you get to 300 episodes and stay consistent with your podcast. So what was the first thing you let go of? And the second question is, what's the thing you probably never want to let go of, or at least at this point don't want to let go of, because it adds your secret sauce to the podcast and only you can do that? I'm looking forward to this episode. Congratulations. 300 episodes is really impressive. Way to go, Shannon.
Aruna, I am so glad that you asked this question. Okay, first of all, I knew at the very start of beginning this podcast that I did not want to be in charge of listening to the audio and then doing all of the magic of editing. And Suzanne does that on our team now, and I am so grateful for her. She makes each and every episode sound better. She mixes in the music and the volumes and the levels, and I really have no idea how she does the magic that she does. I do make some notes like, oh, can you take this part out of this interview? You know, someone coughed or their dog was barking or whatever. We take out snippets like that. But from the very beginning, I passed this over first to a good friend, Rob, who worked away on it. And then I got connected with Suzanne and she took over doing that. So all along I knew, mostly because I don't want to listen to myself again. It's hard to listen to myself. I'm sure that you know, if you are a yoga teacher who makes videos, does social media posts, does any type of audio or interview, takes photos, we can be super critical of ourselves. And so I needed to set that aside and just keep going. And often guests will reach out to me and say, oh my gosh, I just listened to the episode. Like, why do I say so much? Or why didn't I say this? Or I don't like to hear my own voice. I want to reassure you, if you ever want to start a podcast or get on a podcast, I'll put our link to our application page actually, because we have where you can apply as a guest on the podcast. I'll put that in the show notes. But please remember that that inner critic can get really loud and it can often get in our way. So don't let it do that because you have important work to do in this world. And Aruna, the second part of your question was, what do I not want to let go of? And I want to tell you, I appreciate this question so much because it is not easy for me to let go of certain tasks. But I've been able to pass things over. You know, I was like, yeah, a bookkeeper, great. Someone who's going to balance, like, here's the money that came in, here are all of the expenses. Amazing. Kelly on our team does that. Crunch does an amazing job with the show notes. Sinead does a lot of the extra jobs, you know, gathering images and setting up the interviews. All of those things, I'm like, yes, I can definitely pass those over. But in terms of the real, like putting the episode together, I love to roughly outline my own script. But even that, Crunch helps me with that. Crunch really understands my voice and will help me with that. So that's been okay. I think it's down to the wire, like listening back to the interview. I've often thought, could I pass that over to someone else? I really enjoy listening to our guests a second time around and like making sure, okay, if they coughed or used a word that then they corrected themselves, would it sound better to our listeners? And would it kind of take care of our guests to take that piece out? I do love to do that. I think it also helps me to take in the information in a totally different way. When I'm on the spot as the person who's doing the interview, my mind can be jumping around to, you know, what's the next question? How can this help yoga teachers? And when I'm listening back and listening to our guests, I get to learn all over again. It's a different thing. So I do really enjoy doing that. I don't know about the secret sauce to the podcast. It's interesting because I feel like I almost don't know what that is. I'm showing up. Maybe the one thing I've learned that is the secret sauce to this podcast, or I hope it is that I really want to allow a lot of space to hear people when they spend the time to come on as a guest. I don't want to be interrupting them too much or putting my input in too often. I really want to give our guests space to share. And sometimes I get really excited and I want to jump in and say something and add my comments to something. And so that is something that I continue to work on. And I have been told people enjoy that. People enjoy that space in the podcast where our guest expert can really share their expertise. Lastly, I want to say, Aruna, that this question also made me think of, do I have things on my plate that I can pass over? So I was starting to kind of think about that. And that's always a good thing for us to examine in our business. as yoga teachers, if there is something that you're doing over and over again and you're not getting a lot of joy out of it and it's an automated task, that is something to look at to pass on to someone else. And the other thing that I started to think about is how supportive Sean has been in my life. Sean, my partner, Sean, really said, go for it from the first day I mentioned doing a podcast, even though we had no idea how that was going to work and fit into our lives. And there are so many times where he, is taking care of things, especially if I have a busy season in my podcasting business, or he also does that when it's a busy gardening season. I just want to say that there are times where we might think, okay, I'm paying this person, I'm outsourcing this thing. But your question, Aruna, also made me think about how my family supports me as well to do the work that I do. I hope that answered your question. If anyone out there has more questions about passing tasks over or anything about, running a podcast, running a business, I'm more than happy to share kind of my insights. And I would love to hear your insights as well. How do you know when it's time to pass something over to someone else? What's been just liberating to let go of? And what do you hold on to in your own business where you're like, no, I have to be the one to do this? Another shout out of thanks to the team over at OfferingTree. They sponsor this podcast. They are helping us to bring it to your ears right here today. And I'm really grateful for this company because they care about yoga teachers. They care about our podcast. They care about connecting community and making sure that yoga teachers have the help that they need. And I want to share a conversation that I had with a fellow yoga teacher, Sarah, who's a busy mom and she uses OfferingTree. Have a listen to Sarah's thoughts on this scheduling software that goes way beyond that. Hey, connected yoga teachers, I am popping in here for a moment because I wanted to share a bit of a conversation that I recently had with Sarah Villamil, a yoga teacher who's from Calgary, Alberta, who is using the OfferingTree platform. Yes, I talk about OfferingTree lots because I use the software. I really like it. I like the company and they sponsor the podcast. But I thought, how great would it be if you could hear from another yoga teacher who uses OfferingTree?
I started using OfferingTree about a year and a half ago when I realized that I definitely needed to be offering a more accessible online offering and making the offerings that I had predominantly online in a way that would be really user-friendly, seamless, and accessible for my clients.
How did you find out about OfferingTree?
I found out about OfferingTree right at the exact right moment. I had been trying some trials with other platforms and not really getting anywhere. And I hadn't yet given my credit card information to try one. I was in the free trial stages for so many different platforms. I was actually listening to your podcast, Shannon, and you had mentioned OfferingTree, and I thought, okay, I'll try this. So I was just lying in bed with my son, who's a difficult sleeper. He has trouble getting to sleep to this day. And so I was lying in bed with him and he was almost asleep. And I looked up OfferingTree online and I tried the free trial that was available at that time. And in half an hour, I basically had the framework for my website, and everything that I had hoped to include in my website was there, easy enough to be done almost entirely on my phone. So I thought, okay, this is definitely the one that I need to try. This is absolutely perfect.
That's amazing that you could do it from your phone. Thank you so much, Sarah, for chatting with me and telling us why you use and love OfferingTree. And thanks to the entire team over there for continuing to support our podcast. This is really one reason why we're all the way here at episode 300. Here is a question Renee sent in. Have a listen to what she shares and asks.
Hi, Shannon. Happy big episode 300. I am just so grateful that you created this beautiful community for us yoga teachers to come together. And I just want to thank you because you have been one of my biggest cheerleaders, really just encouraging all of my life's twists and turns and career shifts. So I have a question for you. I think it would be really cool to look back and think about, the Shannon that was 300 episodes ago, and think about, out of all the episodes, what are like the top 3 things that you've learned from all of these wonderful people that you've interviewed, including me? What are the top 3 things that if someone's just joining now that you would definitely want them to hone in on? They're your personal aha moments that you would be ooh, if I was a new yoga teacher starting out, I would want someone to know these top 3 things that I personally didn't know along the way. Thank you so much again for just being your amazing, beautiful self. I always enjoy popping in to an episode and just feeling so at home when I listen to your voice and listen to the beautiful people that you introduce into our lives. I know that I have been able to meet some wonderful people just because you interviewed them. So thank you.
Thank you so much for this question and for your thoughts, Renee, and just for your really amazing cheerleading self. You are often one who is, both you and Aruna, often support and share the podcast and stay connected with me in conversation. And I just really appreciate that. Your question got me really excited because one big thing is that I got thinking about a mini series that I want to do in the new year of 2023. So stay tuned. I have it in my brain and I want to put together here are some of the key things, just a general checklist, whether you're a brand new yoga teacher or you've been teaching for years and years, just a checklist of do I have these things in order? Have I thought of these things? So I'm going to put that together for sure. I don't want to give away too much on that, but I feel like it goes along really well with your question. But I also want to tell you that when you asked this question, I was like, gosh, how would I even think over the past 300 episodes, 299 episodes before today, what nuggets of wisdom would I want to know as a newer yoga teacher? And there are so many in the various episodes that we've done, Renee with yours, but every single episode, I've had some big aha moments, key takeaways when I listen to those episodes and I listen to the wisdom that our guests share. So I was a bit overwhelmed at first, but then I thought, you know what? Why don't I think of the 3 things that I would have told myself as a new podcaster, as a yoga teacher who is doing a podcast? And I think it doesn't just apply to someone who's running a podcast, but anyone who's running a business. So here's what I came up with. One is this sticky note that is near my desk every single day. I try and look at it before I do an interview. I look at it often. I probably should put it somewhere in my house so that I look at it also when I'm talking to, I would say mostly family members. That sometimes I could do this more. So that is, it says right here in front of me, communicate and listen to understand, not to be understood. I don't know who first wrote this. I came across it when I did a Zoom call with a collective of yoga teachers, and I really, really took to this right away. So I would also add to that, I wish that I knew that, I wish that I knew that as a younger person in the world. I don't know how I would learn that before making more mistakes. And then that's the other thing is I did a whole episode, and I'll link to it in the show notes, of how being wrong is part of learning. And I wish that I would have known what that would feel like. I don't even know that I could. These are the things that we look back and we think, well, but if I could tell myself, hey, guess what? You're going to have to really listen with the intention of understanding, be okay with being wrong, and that there would be lots of room. If I were to tell myself, there will be tons of room for both unlearning and humility along the way. That would have helped because I sometimes feel the expectation in myself to know more, know everything, and not be wrong. And I think that's a really weird expectation. How could we ever know everything? How could we not be wrong about things? So that would be number one for me, for sure. Number two would be understanding on a deeper level that when people come and tell me that choosing other language will cause less harm, I need to listen to that right from the first step. And I don't think that we've been told that enough in society to acknowledge there might be some resistance and that we really need to look inward at that moment because the resistance is going on within us. It's not about this person who says, hey, this type of wording is offensive to me or is hurtful to me. And this comes right back into yoga, ahimsa, non-harm, choosing language that is less harmful whenever possible. And I know that this goes along with number one of having that humility, unlearning things. But again, to highlight when a population, when a community, when one single person comes forward and says to you, you know what, these words feel hurtful or offensive, I just would ask myself at the very beginning of podcasting, okay, what is making you feel so resistant to just acknowledging that, accepting that, and using that language? Why is there that resistance coming up? That's what I would ask myself. It's not an easy thing to look at sometimes, but I think that's some of our internal work just as a society. I know that I've had conversations with people who feel a frustration over, trying to learn a new way of saying something. And I'm smiling because I'll share a really personal example. I had a cousin who died of suicide years ago. Colton, who's now 19, was in grade 8 that year. And I had grown up and been taught to use the word committed suicide. And it wasn't until I had a close loved one die of suicide that I learned that there's new language that's less hurtful to the family members, to that person who reached that point in their life. And I recently shared this with a family member, and there was some resistance there. No, that's not what it's called. And I just said, I know, I used to feel the same way, but I've learned that this can be language that can really make a difference to someone. And I can feel the difference in myself as well, being a family member. So as a podcaster, I'm putting my words out all the time. And so then I get feedback on my words. The same will happen to you probably as a yoga teacher. So when someone comes to you and says, this type of thing doesn't feel great, it's up to us to listen. Okay, and the third thing is really specific to being a yoga teacher and running a yoga business. I wish I would have known at the beginning. Well, I knew at the beginning. I wish there was some way maybe for me to not lose sight of this. So we all know as yoga teachers how much yoga can really offer. And I wish that I knew how to not lose sight of that sometimes when I'm trying to figure out what to post on social media or what my whole social media strategy is or how to get more podcast listeners or how to get more people registered for a workshop or something that I'm offering. It's easy to kind of lose sight of that beginning feeling of oh my gosh, look at the impact that yoga is having in the way I connect with myself, in the way that I connect with other people. Not losing sight of that, I think, is a continuous work as well. And just so you know, Renee, in all of these are things that I feel like I'm going to be learning these for my lifetime. But with this one, this number 3 here, I was thinking about it, and I think my work is to be curious about how yoga helps me and how yoga helps others. I love hearing stories of, people saying, this is how yoga really impacts my life. And also for myself, not everything can be explained by science. And we recently did an episode with Stevie on, can spirituality and science coexist? That's a great episode. We'll link to it in the show notes. And I feel not everything can be explained by science, but oh my gosh, it is so cool when science confirms how amazing yoga is. So, there's lots to that. It's very nuanced. it's my own reminder, maybe the science isn't there, but I really feel the effects of yoga and I can notice that within myself. I can hear feedback from other people, but to not lose sight of that as I'm running a yoga business. And I think the best way to do that is to stay connected to my own yoga practice. And for me, I fall away from that often. I'll get into a routine. I'm like, yes, I'm doing yoga all the time. And then boom, something will happen in my life. It can be a change of season even. And then I'll fall away from that practice. So to come back to that so that I don't lose sight of that. So I don't know how helpful that is for everyone else to hear. That feels like in my own journey, I wish I would have known those things as a podcaster, as a yoga teacher, and as a human just showing up in life. And these are things that I'm still working on. I would love to hear from you. What do you think are those top 3 things? If you were to answer Renee's question, starting out as a new yoga teacher, what would you want to tell yourself or what would you want to tell a friend if they're a brand new yoga teacher? We also have an episode a while back where it was advice for new yoga teachers. We'll link to that in the show notes. That was a good one. And like I said, Renee, I'm so excited that this kind of coincides with this mini series that I want to do where I'm definitely giving this checklist of don't forget these basic foundational things as a yoga teacher. So watch out for that. That's coming soon. If you're subscribed, then it'll just land in your podcast feed. Thank you again so much, Aruna and Renee, for these really great questions. I hope it inspires other podcast listeners to send questions because I just feel really excited to answer them. I feel really excited that you're supporting the podcast and you have feedback on how it's impacted you and helped you. And it's a nice way to have more of a conversation, not just me talking at this microphone with Leo Cat sitting beside me. Over on our show notes page, theconnectedyogateacher.com/300, I'll link to Renee's website, Aruna's website. Definitely check out their work. They're doing amazing things in this world. And I'll link to any of the podcasts that I talked about. And you can also see over on our website where you can get in touch with us, leave a voice message, send an email, post some comments in the show notes. All of those things you can see from our website. You can also join our Facebook group, which I have to tell you, Sinead told me this just yesterday, that we've almost reached 12,000 worldwide yoga teachers in that super supportive online community. I love to see the conversations that are happening in there of yoga teachers, asking gosh, I need to figure out this thing, or hooray, here's a win. And then just other teachers really sharing their support, their encouragement, their ideas. It's really a cool place to hang out. If you haven't joined our Facebook group yet, you can go over to our website, theconnectedyogateacher.com, and the join button is right on our homepage. If you would like to celebrate with me and offer a gift of thanks for 300 podcast episodes here for you at no charge at all, I would love it if you could leave us a review. If you have not done that already, if you head over to iTunes, you can search for the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast. We love to read reviews here on the podcast. So I will most definitely try and read yours out loud. Tell us who you are, give me your name if it's not in your username, and where you teach, and tell us your thoughts on the podcast. It can be about a specific episode. Maybe it's about today's episode. You can tell us what you love about the podcast. You can tell us what you wish we were doing here on the podcast. And I'm just so grateful if you take the time to do that. If you want to hang out in person, well, for December, it needs to be online. It gets really snowy where I live. I'm not planning any travel for December, but I will be on a live call inside of Pelvic Health Professionals talking about yoga for menopause with our guest expert, Niev Daly, who was on the podcast last week. So if you haven't listened to last week's podcast episode, head on back, listen to that, and then jot down the questions that you have about menopause, perimenopause, postmenopause, and how we can help and support our students through yoga. To sign up for that call and get access to all of our previous live guest expert calls, head on over to pelvichealthprofessionals.com. Next week on the podcast, we are going to be talking about trauma and business ownership. I am really excited about this conversation that Nicole and I had. I learned so much from Nicole, and I'm excited that finally I get to release this episode. I think it's a good time as we dig into the end of the year. Let's uncover some of our stuff that we have going on and look at how it's impacting our business. Huge shout out of thank you to Suzanne, Crunch, and Sinead for making this podcast episode possible, but also so much else. So gosh, they really hold things together over here. Friends, if you know them online, send out a message of thank you to all of them, or just send it out right now. A little moment of gratitude for our entire team over here. They really support this podcast above and beyond. Thank you also to you, dear listener. It warms my heart to think that here you are listening all the way to the end of today's episode when you probably had no idea what was included in the episode. I just wrote, celebrate, 300 episodes. Here we are together. And thank you. Thank you for taking the time. I know you have lots of places that you can hang out. You could be watching videos, listening to music, listening to the news, and here you are spending your time here today, and that means so much. You make this podcast possible. And my question to you as we close out this episode 300 is, what will you be doing this week to stay connected to yourself, to your yoga practice, and to your community so that you can share the yoga that lights you up?